In the last quiet years of the American frontier, before fences drew their lines, I woke before the sun cleared the livery roof to the kind of gray that makes a town hold its breath. The stove at the hotel coughed up yesterday's heat, and the coffee tasted like the bottom of a canteen. I drank it on the steps, hat brim low, watching Main Street bleed from slate to straw. A freight team rattled by with the patient racket of men who planned to be tired before noon. My name is James, though most who needed me called me Hunter, like the word was a coat I never took off. I kept a room above the animals, because leather and oats smell like a promise the dust can't break. My gear lived where my hands expected it. Rifle oiled, 16 cartridges counted by touch, knife keen enough to shave a splinter. I rubbed tallow into a bridle until my thumbs shone and told myself I was only passing a morning. Ordinary days have thin hinges. Something small swings them. For me it was paper on a nail, slapping the mercantile wall with a sound like an impatient hand. I set my cup in the dust and smoothed the notice. The ink bled at the bold words, runaway, Apache, reward. It named no father, no mother, only the money and the fear. Charles, the storekeep, dragged his broom as if sweeping the county line. Sheriff's got the same, he said without looking up. Folks pooled coin at the assay. They want it done before someone takes it personal. Someone already has, I said. He tapped his tooth with a nail and left me to the wind and the paper. The sheriff came out of his office with the careful gait of a man who keeps more ledgers than bullets. Frank was his name, square in the shoulders, red around the cheekbones from talking in sun. He didn't look at the poster. He looked at me the way a blacksmith looks at a hammer, checking wear, not doubting use. Work, he said. Whose kind? I asked. The kind that keeps fear from spilling into bottles, he said. She ran from South Country. Word is, there was trouble at Cienega last winter. Some ranchers swore at shadows and got their oaths answered. Is she the shadow? I asked. He weighed the honest answer and set it aside. Reward stands. Proof required. That word sits rough in the mouth. Proof means a piece of someone carried into a room that wasn't built to hold them. I didn't let it show. I just followed him inside, watched him count out 20s like he didn't want to know who'd touched them, and slid them into my vest where the heat made paper sweat. You don't like this one, Frank said. I don't like a lot of things, I said. I still do them. He didn't tell me not to think. Frank's not a fool. He just put his hand flat on the desk as if stopping a map from curling up. South and a touch east, he said. Dry arroyos. Mesquite thick as law. You know where she'll run. You've run there. I nodded because he was right. The land decides most of our choices before we think to choose. I saddled the bay mare in the livery's quiet, the way you talk to a woman who's worked with you longer than your own patients. She chewed the bit and gave me half an ear when I said her name, Belle, a stable boy joke that stuck. I checked her shoes, leaned into the cinch, stood back to see what I couldn't feel, then led her into the morning like a man stepping onto a raft. The South Road shrugged off its name and became idea. Wagon ruts thinned. The wind came up with the taste of metal. Lightning, miles away under a blue that pretended innocence. I let the mare pick a trot where the ground forgave it and watched for what didn't fit. A crust turned, a seed pod crushed wrong, the shine knocked off a pebble. I found sign where a wash bent like a tired back. Small feet, quick at first, then slowed, then quick again. The stride spoke in short sentences. Now, wait, now. Twice the heels dug deep the way a person learns to lean when a stitch takes them hard. I crouched and set 2 fingers to the print. The sun had not yet erased its cooler rim. She wasn't far. A thread of cloth clung to catclaw. Coarse weave, undyed, the grease of a long wear rubbed into it. Not a town skirt. Not bought last week with a miner's foolishness. I rolled it between thumb and finger, then set it in my vest pocket like a prayer bead that didn't belong to my church. The wash kept its own counsel. Cottonwoods held back their shade like misers. I drank 3 swallows and poured 1 for the mare's tongue. Gratitude is a language horses speak more honest than men. A vulture angled high and watched me the way a banker watches a dice game. The ground told me she'd tried open flats, then cut toward thicker brush where a deer path stitched sideways. That path invites men who want to be hard to see and hard to chase. It also breaks ankles. I kept to the wash where prints last longer and wind makes fewer arguments. By noon the sun had a hand on my neck. I found where she'd sat with her back to a cottonwood and pressed her palms low under her belly. The sand held the heel of her hand and the small arcs her fingers had traced, steady, like a woman smoothing cloth, like a woman counting pain between breaths. I didn't touch that print. Some things you look at and let be, the way you look at a grave and keep your head in your hand. I set my palm a foot away and felt the heat the tree had spared. The ground keeps a kind of memory that doesn't belong to anyone. I stood and let the fact settle into me without shaking me apart. I had been paid to bring fear a souvenir. Instead, I had found a woman carrying her own danger and her own hope, both in one place. I don't pray in ways a preacher could approve, but I've got a line I say when the day asks for it. Let me do this right. I said it to the cottonwood leaves, which talk more than they listen, and to the wind which goes everywhere and learns nothing. The trail sharpened. Toes bit down and slid where the wash steepened. She avoided rock when she could and took it careful when she couldn't. Twice she'd stopped and leaned on her forearms, elbows in the sand, to let a wave pass. I matched my pace to the patience a man needs when he's choosing the next kind of man he'll be. By late light the wash widened to a bowl where moon would come easy. I dismounted and walked Bell by the rain to keep iron quiet. The sand near the far bank was pocked with small kneels and pushes, the kind no tracker draws in a book because any mother can read it. My mouth went dry like I'd chewed creosote. She's close, I told the mare, because talking to an animal keeps the words from echoing back too loud inside your head. I knelt and listened with my hands. A small sound moved ahead, then stillness, then the sound again. Not animal. A person making agreement with themselves and then losing it and making it again. I set the canteen on the sand, pulled the cork, tipped it so the neck glinted weak in the shade. Then I put my right hand palm up beside it and kept my eyes on the dirt between my boots. The air changed first, the way it does when fear gets within arm's length. She stood one step back from the canteen and waited for me to move. I didn't. After a piece of time that measured itself, she took the water with both hands and drank in small swallows, stopping when the breath wanted its share. She set it down like it belonged to the ground, and not to me. I lifted my head to the thinking height, and no more. Hair in ropes, dust bright on her cheeks where sweat had dried, skirt torn high enough to show a shin chalked by the wash. Her hands didn't leave her belly even to push hair from her eyes. She was young the way a desert makes everything look older and smaller at once. She watched my shoulders, not my face. "I'll walk in front," I said. "If men ride this wash, they'll find me first." Words don't buy trust. Time does, and water. And not crowding a person who has every reason to distrust a hat like mine. She didn't answer. She measured the edges of our small place and the bigger place around it, and made a choice I couldn't hear. Then she moved 2 steps to the side and lowered herself, careful, to sit close to the bank where the stone held its night cool a little longer. I took out my knife, cut my bandana in half, soaked 1 piece from the canteen, and set it on the sand between us. She didn't reach. After a while, when I'd forgotten I'd placed it for her and not for me, she took it and pressed it to her neck and let the cold write its short blessing. The sky to the south had gone the color of a bruise you lie about. Thunder spoke without rain, the way a man clears his throat before saying something he'll wish he hadn't. I looked up at the walls for flash marks and at the bank for the climbing ledges I'd want if water decided to come all at once. The ground told me it would take a lot to wake this wash, but a lot is what storms do when they decide to remember you. I made no fire. I tore jerky and chewed until the salt reminded my body it had work to do. I slid my rifle into reach of my calm, not my fear. Belle dozed with one ear cocked toward us, the other tuned to the shape of the wind. We didn't speak because there was nothing to say that wouldn't cheapen the work ahead. When the first pain took her, it took the air with it. She bowed, palms at the base of her belly, and breathed the way a person does when they've learned what breathing is for. When it passed, she kept her hand there and her eyes on the ground, as if reading a letter she'd read 100 times and never understood until now. I didn't count the minutes to the next. That's for someone who wants to think they're in charge. I cut 2 willow saplings where the wash dog-legged and split their ends, weaving a cradle from yucca fibers I twisted wet with spit and patience. A travois is a humble tool, but humble tools build most of what holds. I let Belle sniff the frame and rubbed lard thin along the runners, so it would slide without telling the world where we'd gone. The girl watched my hands and the way I set my shoulders and decided I was a man who knew what he was doing, or a man who acted like one. Out here the difference is smaller than you think. Above us the ridge showed hats for a breath and then swallowed them. Sun flashed on something straight. Metal, a spyglass maybe, or a gun barrel catching a kindness it didn't deserve. I didn't lift the rifle. I didn't change the girl's sky with my worry. I set the travels aside like it was nothing, and walked Belle by the rain to the deeper shadow where the cottonwood roots braided into the bank. The men moved on. Men who think they have all afternoon never hurry. When dark came, it was clean. The kind that settles on you like a blanket someone washed too many times. The stars found their places with the stubborn patience of nails. A coyote gave 2 barks, and then decided against conversation. I took off my hat, set it brim up on the sand between us like a small, honest bowl where anyone could put a need. The bandana in her hand had gone warm, and she traded it for the cool half. I dipped again and sat back without looking at her. We passed that night like 2 people sheltering under the same ledge, each with their own weather. I slept in pieces small enough to wake between them. She rested the way a bowstring rests, drawn, capable of sound at any moment. When the moon slid over the lip of the wash and put silver on the brush tips, a breeze came down canyon with the good smell of willow roots finding what they were after. It felt like a true thing I could stand inside. In the first thin light, I told her the shape of my morning. We go where the canyon tightens and the sun can't bully, I said. There's a seep ahead. If men ride the rim, it'll confuse them. If rain speaks, stone will speak louder. She touched her belly and nodded once, the way a person nods to the inside of themselves. Consent isn't always a word. Sometimes it's a breath with your head lifted. I stood, stretched my back without grunting, and lifted the travois to show the mare we were leaving. Belle huffed once, ears twitching like she was measuring the sky. We moved before the sun found us. I walked ahead, putting my boots where the wash would take back my prints by noon. The girl followed, halting when she had to and going when she had no choice. I gave her my arm at roots and ruts the same way you pass a tool handle first. She took it when she wanted and let go when she didn't. Good manners save more lives than good shooting. We reached the seep by mid-morning. It was a stingy thing, water thin as wire, but it wet cloth and cooled wrists. I cut my bandana again, so we had more small blessings to pass around. She closed her eyes when the cloth touched her neck and the lines at the corners softened in a way that made the day look less like punishment. The sky gathered itself into decision. A rim of cloud showed its black underskirt. I marked the climbing places and the benches where water couldn't bully us. I marked, too, the shadow of a man's fear circling on the ridge like a hawk that hasn't made up its mind which rabbit it wants. The wash spoke quietly in its dry voice, but I could hear the memory of floods in the smoothness of the stones. We'd gone a mile into that tight country when I found what I'd hoped for and dreaded, a little shelf of rock backed by stone, high enough to watch, low enough to run. I set the travois there, stacked deadfall where my hand could find it without looking, and put my rifle where my calm could reach it first. The girl sat and bowed again to the work inside her, and the work bowed back. I'm a man who once counted himself practical and left mercy to preachers and women with aprons. The land taught me different. It teaches slow. It takes years and gives you back one clean thought. Custom keeps people alive. Not law, not pay, not fear. Custom. No one should come into the world alone. No one should go out that way either. That's a rule the wind won't argue. I poured a cap of water and set it near her knee. Belle shifted. The travois creaked like a quiet door, and a hawk called once from a rim we couldn't see. The sun slid behind cloud and the light went kind without promising anything. I felt the old coat of the work I'd been paid for pinch at the shoulder and hang wrong. I had a line I'd heard in my own mouth before I'd understood it. What comes through me first. I let it sit there, like a tool on a bench, near, ready, heavy enough to earn its space. Then I looked up at the rim, and then down at the woman and the child, who hadn't yet chosen a name for the morning. The wash was quiet. The day was not. I made my vow clear enough that the ground could hear it if it cared to. Then I waited for whatever would test it. The storm reached us before the Ridge Riders did. The air turned heavy first, a smell of iron and dust mixing like the sky had rubbed two stones together. The girl, Mary, she told me between breaths, like she was reminding herself who she was, pressed both hands to her belly and wrote out another pain. I crouched beside her, watching the edge of the world close in. We'll find high ground, I said. Stone'll keep us drier than brush. She nodded once, jaw set. I built a frame from willow and leather, and Belle leaned into it with that low grunt she gives when the work isn't fair, but it's right. Lightning crawled across the ridge, bright enough to cut out 3 riders against the horizon. Their shapes flashed, then vanished into rain. I knew one by his slouch. Deputy Charles, Sheriff Frank's man. He'd traded his broom for a badge, and figured both could sweep sin away. We moved along the canyon floor until the wash rose, thin water finding its tongue. I spotted an overhang of sandstone, high enough to keep us dry, and we climbed for it, my boots slipping twice on wet shale. Mary followed with quiet courage, stopping only when a contraction bent her near double. Inside the hollow, wind whistled like an old flute. I struck a spark and hid the flame behind my hat, coaxing a small fire the color of a dying sun. "You rest," I said. "I'll watch the mouth." She lay back against the travois blanket, breathing like a steady clock made of pain and patience. Thunder cracked. She flinched but didn't cry out. "You came for me," she whispered, voice thin as thread. "I came for a name on a poster," I said. "Seems I found something else." The firelight showed the tremor in her hand as she reached for water. "They'll kill me," she said. "Call it justice." I poured a small cup and held it steady. "They won't find you tonight." Gravel skittered above. "Loose. Quick." Belle nickered once. I stepped into the rain's edge and saw lanterns wobble along the wash below. Willow. Wisps in bad weather. Frank's men were near. I put the fire out with my boot and pressed a finger to my lips. Mary covered her mouth, rocking with another pain. Fear was sharp as wet leather in that hollow. It was mine, not hers. The rider shouted over the storm. "She's got to be near," one barked. "Tracks end by the ridge." We waited while their lights blurred and thinned and dropped away. When I turned back, sweat brightened Mary's face. She watched me, then the dark beyond me. "It's time," she said. The word carried everything. I knelt beside her, hands clumsy but willing. "Tell me what you need." "Water," she breathed. "And don't leave." So I didn't. I boiled rainwater in my tin, tore my spare shirt to strips, and did the work Emma the midwife once showed with a patient exactness you don't learn from sermons. Outside, the storm shouldered past and left the steady drip of runoff from the roof. Hours went by like seasons do, slow when you're counting, fast when you're not. Near dawn, when the sky traded black for iron gray, the child came with a small, fierce cry that filled the hollow. Mary gathered him close, eyes bright like she'd caught a bolt of lightning and meant to keep it. I sat back on my heels, tired in ways I hadn't earned. "He's strong," I said. She smiled faintly. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised," I said, reminded. Hoofbeats again. Closer now, the storm no longer hiding them. I took up my rifle and kept it low. Frank called from below, his voice carried by echo and something that might have been regret. "James, you up there?" I stepped to the lip. "I found her." I called. He shaded his eyes. "And?" "And she's done nothing but survive," I said. "That's not a crime I recognize." Frank blew out a breath the wind took for its own. "You know what they paid for?" "I do." I slung the rifle behind me. Tell them you never found her. Tell them she died in the storm. That's true enough for a man who needs it. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he turned his horse. You'll owe me for this, he said. I already do. When they were gone, the world widened again. Mary held the baby, his fist wrapped around her finger like a knot meant to hold. You risked your life, she said. Wasn't worth much till tonight, I told her. We slept in shifts after that, the three of us sharing the hollow's thin warmth. I kept the fire no bigger than a hat brim, and fed it with slivers that smoked less than patience. If you're listening with dry mouth, take a sip yourself. The body works better when it's remembered with water. By afternoon, the storm's edge had walked off into other country. Mary was pale, but steady. I made broth from scrap and salt, cooled it, and she took what she could in slow swallows. I set a clean cloth warming near the coals and wrapped it around a stone for her back. Belle cropped at the wet grass under the overhang and pretended not to watch us. We waited through another night. At first light, when the wash had gone back to its old quiet, and Mary could stand without the room tipping, I rigged the travois light and gentle. We didn't ride. No woman rides the day after a birth, unless death waves her on. I walked. Belle leaned into the pull, and Mary paced beside when she could, the baby tucked tight against her. We took the canyon's shaded turns and kept to the benches, where water couldn't bully us. I set a false trail down a side cut for any man still curious, and then turned us toward the bluff, where a midwife kept her stubborn garden and her sharper skills. I'd fetched her before for ranch women who didn't like to ask for help until they needed it. By late day we saw the cottonwoods that marked that place, their leaves whispering the same old comfort. Smoke lifted from a small chimney and lay flat in the cooler air. I stopped and let Mary breathe. We'll make the door by sundown, I said. She's a good woman. She keeps a kettle hot and her opinions hotter. You'll like the first and forgive the second. Mary nodded. The baby sighed and went back to the hard work of sleeping. Belle flicked an ear like she agreed with the plan. We took the last rise slow. A dog gave one warning woof and then decided we smelled like work, not harm. A figure moved in the doorway, apron already tied. I raised a hand and kept my voice low. Ma'am, I said. It's James. We've brought weather with us. The door opened wider. Warm light fell across the threshold and reached as far as our boots. We stepped into it like men step into church when they mean to listen. By the time I reached the next town north, the sky had gone pale with dust and distance. My coat was stiff with rain turned to crust, and Belle's hooves rang against the stone like small coins. I bought feed, water, and a seat where nobody asked names, the kind of cafe where coffee tastes like tin and truth costs extra. I sat with both hands around the cup, feeling that slow ache that comes when a job ends, but the reckoning doesn't. Every man who's worked for pay knows that weight, the one that doesn't lift, even after the coins are counted. A boy came through selling news sheets from Santa Fe. One headline carried a single word that pulled at me: raid. The story was thin on facts but heavy with blame. I folded it and pushed it aside. Out here, truth travels slower than gossip and dies sooner. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of mesquite smoke and iron. I thought of Mary, somewhere along the bend, cradling that child. how she'd held him like she was protecting a spark the world might snuff out if it saw the glow. I'd left her with the widow on the bluff, Emma's old friend. Safe enough for now, or safer than where I'd found her. I told myself I'd ride back south soon, make sure Frank kept his word, make sure no one started asking questions too loud. But I didn't. I lingered. A man who owes the truth a debt sometimes pays it by waiting. That night, thunder rolled again, far off, an old argument still working its way through the hills. I stepped outside, leaned against the hitch rail, and listened. A pair of riders passed, talking low. "Sheriff says he burned the bounty posters," one said. "Says the law's done its part." That was Frank's kind of mercy. Quiet, half measure, just enough to keep his sleep untroubled. I tipped my hat to the dark, a small salute to a man trying and failing to be better than his orders. By dawn I'd saddled Belle and turned back toward Emma's bluff. The world still smelled of wood smoke and rain. When the cottonwoods came into view, their leaves silvered by morning light, I felt something in me ease for the first time in years. Emma stood on the porch, apron gray with ash. She nodded once. "You're early." "Couldn't find sleep," I said. "Sleep's for men with nothing left to think about," she replied. "She's fine. So's the child. She named him Charles." The name landed like a small stone tossed from far away, light in the hand, heavy in the heart. "After the deputy?" I asked. "After the man she forgave first," Emma said, drying her hands. "She says forgiveness is lighter than fear, easier to carry." I didn't answer. Some truths are better honored in silence. I stepped to the doorway. Inside, Mary sat near the hearth, the baby tucked against her chest, both asleep. Morning light caught her face and softened it the way water softens stone. I left my hat in my hands and stood a while. Then I set something by the door, the last silver coin from Frank's pay, and walked back out before she could wake. On the trail down, I passed a wagon train headed west, women in bonnets, men with dust in their hair. One woman called out, "You heading for the mountains?" "Not yet," I said. Truth was, I didn't know where I was heading. Maybe nowhere a map could name. Maybe just away from the man who'd once called himself Hunter, and toward the one who'd learned what it meant to stand still. By noon the desert had warmed to that clean metal smell it wears after rain. I turned Belle's south again, not to chase, but to guard what I'd left behind. Frank would ask one day if I'd found proof. I'd tell him yes, but not the kind that fits in a hand. The kind that breathes, cries, and goes quiet when the world's too loud. That evening I camped near the same wash where I'd first seen her footprints. I built a small fire, smaller than habit, and watched the smoke drift into twilight. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like judgment. It felt like company. I took the folded poster from my vest pocket, the ink almost gone, and fed it to the flames. The paper curled slow, black around the edges, and folded in on itself. "Go in peace," I said, "to no one, and maybe to everyone." When the fire died, I lay back on my saddle and looked up at a sky wide enough to forgive any man who'd earned it the hard way. It's been 12 years since that night in the wash, but I still wake sometimes to the sound of rain on stone and think it's her voice calling through the dark. The desert's changed in small ways. A few more fences, a few less men who remember what mercy looks like, but the wind still smells of iron and juniper after a storm. I don't chase anyone anymore. Folks around here just call me James now, not Hunter. I mend saddles, fix fences, trade horses that need patience more than a whip. When men ask about the scars on my hands, I tell them work leaves its marks. They don't need to know the rest. Every few months, I ride north to Emma's Bluff, with a bundle of coffee or sugar wrapped in cloth. A boy meets me at the gate, 12 now, tall for his years, skin the color of red earth after rain. He calls me sir until I tell him not to. His mother stands on the porch, quiet smile under her shawl. I tip my hat, and we don't speak of that storm or the bounty that paid for his birth. We just talk about the land, what the rain's doing, how the cottonwoods are holding up, how Belle's foal took her first step this spring. When I ride away, the boy always waves. The wind steals his words before they reach me, but I can see the shape of them. Thank you. Every man out here keeps a private prayer. Mine never changed. What comes through me first. And if there's any justice left in this wide, stubborn country, maybe that's enough.